All right. Hello and welcome to another edition of Redspin Sports. We've been heavy on the live streams lately, and many of you have been following me on, the Redspin Reports on By Any Means Necessary, and Michael Sampson, one of our co-hosts, on, Political Misfits a couple of times. And anyways, but today we have a special guest, and we're really glad to get back and kind of just have one-on-one discussion, interviews, kind of about the way the worlds of politics and sports converge. And today, we'd like to welcome Dan Kovalik to the show, who is the author of many books. Has been, graduate of Columbia University Law School. Has worked with as legal counsel of the United Steelworkers. Has really been, huge on the issue of anti-imperialism and international solidarity. Constantly pointing out the contradictions and sort of the almost upside down, hilarious absurdities of all the talk of election meddling here in the United States. When you look at the body of U.S. work around the world, but of course that doesn't count, right? It's only what's between these borders, they would say, defenders of the empire. But nonetheless, he has worked. You look at taking on tort cases against Coca-Cola, petroleum companies like Drummond and Occidental. He's, been, Project Censored has pointed out his work and how it's been suppressed by, in many cases, because obviously when you take on powerful people and interest and corporate power in this country, we often hear about government power and whatnot these days. But corporate power is really the third, one of those things that seems almost impossible to touch on. So his latest book is No More War, with a great blurb from Oliver Stone there about obviously the amazing filmmaker and commentator and documentarian that we all are blessed to be able to have and benefit from his work, especially people's his work on the Empire, the Untold History of the United States, which is still on Netflix. So somehow. So anyways, Dan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much. And if you have any opening comments, I also mentioned he'd written in Huffington Post and Counterpunch. Kind of just take the floor in terms of just whatever you feel is important. I mean, you have the book No More War out, but also just sort of how you see between politics on the left and also the world of sports maybe converging, and also maybe your story going back to how kind of you came to be who you are today.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. I'm really glad to be here. To talk about the old days at Moeller is actually a fun thing to do. Yeah. I want to mention, of course, Oliver Stone has at least one sports movie on any given Sunday, right?
Yeah,
without about the NFL.
Right.
So I grew up in Milford, Ohio. It's a little town outside of Cincinnati, and I played football from the age of 8 to 18. Played Pee-wee football for Milford Eagles. We were terrible. We never won. Like, if we won one game a season, we were happy. And then I went to Moeller, where we did win, and we were state champions my senior year, 1985, and that was incredible. Mm-hmm. And I played with some amazing people. Ken Griffey Jr., better known for baseball, of course, but he was a receiver on the team. And those were good days. I mean, it was an interesting place to be, Moeller. It's a Catholic school, as most people who know about Moeller would know. And it was an interesting place. Most of the brothers, they're Marianists, from the Marianist order. Most of them were pretty liberal, actually. Mm-hmm. But the most dominant of all there was a guy named Father John Putka. And he was he's still with us. He's in Arizona now, I think. He was a kind of a force of nature. He had been in the Marines, and he was a very right-wing guy. And he, as I said, I would say was a very dominant figure in the school. And he was the football chaplain. Mm-hmm. So that was interesting. He brought the contra leader to speak.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. No, he was a serious motherfucker, if I can say that.
Yeah, man, go for it. We're not monetized yet here.
Right. So, and the truth is, at that time, I shared his views largely. I mean, I grew up in a pretty right-wing household and very conservative Catholic household, anti-communist, very afraid of the Soviet Union, kind of bought all that. And it's hard to separate truthfully the Catholicism from Moeller or from the football. I mean, it was part of it. We went to church before the game, the big game on Friday night. When we had summer practices, 2-a-day practices, as we got off the field for lunch, Putka usually, but someone else might be there to give us the Eucharist as we marched off the field. We'd pray on the sidelines. I mean, it was very much a part and parcel of school life and football life. And again, I was okay with that. I was very religious at that time. In fact, on senior day, so it's senior day at for football, the juniors make shoes up for you. Your cleats are decorated for the seniors.
Yeah.
You know about that or that practice somewhere. Anyway, the guy who did mine made mine into a little priest vestment because I was so religious. So that gives you a little sense of things. But, the truth is, and again, tell me if I'm going too far afield of what I should be discussing.
Sure.
But the Catholicism ended up, leading me towards leftism. As it has others, Fidel Castro attributed his Jesuit upbringing to his social concerns.
Would you say liberation theology played a big part in that?
Yes, I got into liberation theology. And as I've told this story many times, but even before I got into liberation theology, even before I became more liberal and then left in my political outlook, I got very interested in Central America from a very early age, particularly after the murder of Archbishop Romero in San Salvador in 1980. I was 12 years old at the time. And that was a big deal. Like, that kind of shook my world because pretty quickly it was, even the U.S. media pretty quickly said that it looked like U.S.-backed forces were behind that, And he's a saint now, by the way, so he was declared a saint in 2019 by this Pope Francis.
Right.
And then, of course, a few months later, the 4 churchwomen were raped and murdered. And that was big news. I mean, everyone knew about that, and the Catholics knew about that, of course. Both events, by the way, are portrayed in a very good Oliver Stone film, Salvador. Those events led me to where I am now, and if I weren't Catholic, I wouldn't have cared as much, is the truth of it.
Right. So yeah, in a world with nihilism kind of on the rise and people feeling like there's really seeing no kind of hope, you see so much out there. We're just bombarded with inundated, I think is the better word, even with just notifications and people tugging at us on our time here, and especially someone like myself who I feel like is creative and interested, intellectually curious, but has a very difficult time having a million different things kind of going on at once and being able to kind of zero in. It's a difficult, challenging landscape, I think, for some people to sort of find their way. But a few things you said I wanted to react to because it really kind of spoke to me in a different way. I mean, I grew up Presbyterian in the South in Jacksonville, Florida, so Protestant Catholic difference. But in terms of, I had a grandfather who's about to be 99 and had a very big influence on me, and in a lot of ways good, and in a lot of ways not so good. But also sports were a huge role. And you mentioned the Catholicism, ironically, being a vehicle for being very right wing in the community, being married with anti-communism, and I think you would agree that you can't really understand the modern ideology of the United States and the way people think and their fears and anxieties without understanding it through the lens of anti-communism and how that has just shaped everything, from why people fear, quote, socialized medicine and whatnot. But you get down to things that people traditionally on the left think is reactionary, stuff like football, Catholicism. In your case, in my case, it was football and then the issues of race and how my granddad would take me to these Civil War reenactments, framing the Civil War, the typical lost cause type narrative stuff. He went to West Point. It was never like, using the N word constantly or whatever, but it was just sort of framed that, that's, there's the North, they have their history, and the South, you have our history. This idea that, our history is being attacked. So I went through this process of like kind of being also kind of conservative up through high school. For me, it was like college, having some serious college football injuries that then knocked me out of things. And then from there, like also being exposed to Cleveland Sellers of SNCC, who was a professor of mine my last semester at South Carolina. And then sort of but my point is in saying all this is just when you are raised in an environment, and my parents, I would say, are not like super right wing, but overall the community and the fact that I played football, played sports, was college football was such a huge cultural thing in the South where I grew up, and being surrounded by so many kind of right wing forces. But then you see the other side of that, and you see how when you get knocked down, for me it was an injury, and starting to sort of deconstruct the myths of with all this BS about the lost cause, and then about the wars and about empire, and then Bush and Cheney, and I think what it does is it creates a sense of where it's not like someone who grew up purely being a leftist, right? And they've like kind of come from that orthodoxy. You're able to sort of understand and have a different kind of double consciousness. And I think that it's powerful. It was for me. And football, ironically, is one of the most integrated spaces in a society that I feel like is increasingly becoming more segregated and fragmented along class lines again, or resegregated. For me, growing up in kind of an upper middle class prep school in Jacksonville, same high school where Chipper Jones went, D. Brown of the Boston Celtics, for a little context. But it was a world that if I hadn't kind of gotten knocked down, if I hadn't played on AAU travel basketball teams, if I hadn't been exposed through sports and then had the exposure to people like Cleveland Sellers and others, you just see how people never break out of like the sort of rigid ideology that people are given. So my point is the reason this whole show kind of came to be. Friend of mine, Max Blumenthal, who's I
love Max Blumenthal.
Yeah, Max is yeah. But he really encouraged me with this because he thought that there was like a void, and there's always this idea that and I'm building up to my next question. Sorry, but I just kind of wanted to contextualize this and make the connection between how sometimes, when you see things for what they are, you're exposed to the most naked form of like, kind of reactionary politics. And then you see how that's all deconstructed. It's sort of like I've listened to Oliver Stone too, and you hear about the disillusionment he felt and kind of having to work through that
especially in Vietnam. Yes.
Right.
Being in the military.
Exactly. So they're working so on a much greater scale, but like working through that disillusion and then say, well, what do I go from here to try to build something new? So, I'm sure you've lost friends. I've lost friends over stuff, whatever, but you really realize who real friends are and what meaningful relationships are and which ones aren't. But I think that it's an interesting insight that ideologically in this country, the way stuff like football, the stuff like the church, religion, that are presented as apolitical, and we've seen this in recent years so much with the Kaepernick stuff and the way that the right wing reacts and the way they refuse to see the flyovers of games and all that as a sign of politics somehow.
And it's just outright bizarre, frankly.
Isn't that? I mean, that's not. Politics,
there's no other country in the world that does that. We outdo North Korea in terms of the, militaristic, fetishism, that we have in this country. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. You have the Blue Angels were born there and the air shows and all. And it's like that's apolitical, but God forbid you use a platform that you have to raise the attention to police brutality. Part of it is, I think, the customer, the white fan, maybe tell me if you think I'm onto something here, that goes to games. They kind of expect sacrifice is part of it. And part of the allure of football is we're a settler colonial nation. It's kind of baked into our DNA. But you're not out there on the frontier anymore playing those like racist games. Kids would grow up playing cowboys and Indians and whatnot, or even literally be out on the frontier being settlers, or things have changed. But it gives a way when they go to a game to kind of recreate the experience of being like feeling like they're in charge. They're the one who's paying money for a spectacle, and they expect the objects of their attention, meaning like which are actually subjective players, to kind of reaffirm their sense of identity, to give them a sense of like, oh, I'm escaping from my life here. This is different. This is like a place for me to feel good. And I think that's where a lot of that like backlash comes from. Is that, I mean, I know you worked in the steel country, with these United Steelworkers and whatnot. I mean, maybe just real quickly, just sort of what are your thoughts about like where kind of ideologically the visceral type reaction and the hatred towards like player activism comes from? And can that just be traced back to like anti-communism, other forces? I'm just kind of curious ideologically where you think that kind of fan visceral hatred for, especially when it's minority athletes, black athletes.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a long history of resistance in sports, and as long as there's been resistance in sports, there's been reactions to that resistance. So of course you had the famous incident in 1968 in the Mexico City Olympic Games with the two African American runners who raised their fists with the black gloves. On the medal podiums. And of course, many Americans thought that was disrespectful, was upset about that. You had Muhammad Ali, who I remember I watched him fight as a kid. It was in his, the autumn of his days. He was older then. He was fighting people like Larry Holmes and Leon Spinks.
Right.
But even then, I was very attracted to Muhammad Ali as a personality. I liked him. I rooted for him when I watched him. But my dad hated him because he opposed the Vietnam War, because he changed his name from a Christian name, to a Muslim name. By the way, I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, where he's from.
Right. Absolutely.
And so, I think, look, there's an ideological component to it. There's people who feel like they don't like people criticizing the flag and the country and the military. And they get upset about that. I think some of it is what you were saying. Some of it is less ideological. It's simply that, some person, and again, I'm not going to, I don't want to characterize who that person is, but, a fan is sitting down with a beer to watch a football game, and they just don't want to be bothered thinking about anything. And if you make them think about something, it pisses them off. They want to be entertained. They want, and the commercials, as we know, are just as much a part of the entertainment as the event itself. So I think that's a big part of it. As you say, it is a spectator sport. It is as you say, the customer is the spectator, and they don't want to be bothered while they're trying to have fun, essentially.
Right. But how do we square that then with I guess it's just cognitive dissonance, I guess is what we have to chalk it up to. I mean, we've talked about this endlessly with different people and you get different results. I think part of it is the fear that goes back to there's a fear of black masculinity in American society that goes way back. I mean, Scottsboro boys are a notable case, but so many instances of the idea of empowered. I mean, you saw with you mentioned John Carlos and Tommy Smith, Muhammad Ali, but this idea that they're not just grateful, they're not just out there to shut up and dribble, like Laura Ingraham said, but that not making the connection that, if they're this idea of them being overpaid always fascinates me, because it's not like if that money's coming out of a player's salary who's putting their body on the line, who's like you mentioned, and we'll get to Tommy Waddle and we'll get to some of these other guys who've, the old phrases like, you got your bell rung, right? Which used to just be commonplace in football, I mean, you just kind of got roughed up a little bit, but now we know with CTE, right? That's a little bit more than just getting roughed up. And the idea that sacrifice of the body is something that, it's just looked at as whatever. It's a privilege. I would love to be doing it if I had your talent, not knowing what goes into it. And the idea that money is not going to be earmarked to go pay teachers more or to provide people with health care. It's going right to a billionaire's pocket, right? And the way fans, I don't know why it is that so many fans have a desire, I guess that maybe they see themselves potentially wishing they were the boss, wanting to be a boss in American society, but siding with ownership over players who are sacrificing everything to put their bodies on the line for entertainment. I was wondering, just any insight. If you want to go ahead and jump on the Tommy Waddle issue with that, because it kind of Dave Duerson, I know, is another one. There's been so many issues. Junior Seau players whose lives have literally, been sacrificed. I mean, Seau's, no longer with us. But where does that come from? This desire to kind of see yourself as management, maybe in fantasy football and sports, you see some of that a little bit. And how does that maybe tie into the larger struggle in the issues of labor solidarity we have and challenges we have on a larger societal level in terms of building solidarity around, trying to rebuild a fighting left, a fighting labor movement that can actually flex muscle and have credible strike threats and whatnot. It'd be cool to see fans actually support these players, instead of the other way around.
Right. Well, look, I think a lot of it comes down to what Utah Phillips, the old wobbly folk singer, used to say. Mm-hmm. People tend to blame downwards.
Yeah. For
their problems. They don't blame upwards. And maybe it is the power relationship they're afraid to blame upwards. Or, mm-hmm. as you say, they see themselves as having the chance to be up there, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to win the lottery or whatever. And when they do win the lottery, they don't want to be taxed too much or whatever, right?
Right.
So
right.
they're protecting themselves. I forget who said it. Was it William Faulkner maybe that?
That's my favorite. There.
Yeah. In America, there are no poor people, just disappointed millionaires. And
it's a great quote.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I think that is the view people have, and so they do relate so hard to the winners. Is what it comes down to. They want to be a winner. They relate to the winners. And they think if you're at the bottom, you deserve to be. And some of that goes back to, again, we're talking about Christianity. Some of that goes back to some forms of Christianity that inform mm-hmm. this country,
Right.
The belief that essentially God rewards you on this earth if you're a good person right. and punishes you if you're not. So I think that's part of it. Yeah. The one thing I want to mention that we didn't, talk about really is college sports because that's an even more exploited group of people. And, I worked for the Steelworkers, which for years has supported organizing efforts there. I don't know if mm-hmm. you know that, but so that's an interesting thing. And those people are super exploited, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just beyond the beyond. So,
maybe talk just briefly because I know steel workers, a lot of people hear about outsourcing and whatnot. I mean, how much domestic steel industry still is there? I mean, in PA, Ohio, that we hear of as the Rust Belt. Is that term something that's a pejorative to people in the area too? I was kind of curious. Or
Rust Belt,
right?
Because it is. We used to have something at the height. And when I say the height, it wasn't that long ago. Mm-hmm. It was in the 1970s, and it happened to coincide with the great Pittsburgh Steelers teams.
Yeah.
And the Pirates were good then, too.
Right. We are a family Pirates, right?
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, you saw the pitcher, the African-American left-wing pitcher that won Game 7 in 1979 for the Pirates died yesterday.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Was that not Doc Ellis or was that who was
getting his name?
Because I know Doc Ellis was famous also for his LSD no-hitter, but different, maybe a different guy.
Let me see. But in any case, of course, we also had the great Roberto Clemente.
Of course. Yeah.
So the point is, we were riding high. I wasn't living in Pittsburgh. By the way, I should say that I didn't live here during the 70s. I was in Cincinnati and hated the Steelers, by the way, then. But in the 70s, Pittsburgh as a steel town was riding high. Everything was going great. Mm-hmm. And the steel mills were pumping, and people had jobs, and they had good jobs. And that changed literally overnight. I talk to people. I know people who worked at the Homestead Works right across the river. Homestead used to be a more attractive place than Pittsburgh, even for tourists. Like, people wanted to come to Homestead. At one point, they had like 40 bars lined up on the main drag there. Mm-hmm. And the Homestead Works were one of the biggest steel mills, basic steel mills in America. And literally overnight they closed.
Wow.
The first sign of it, by the way, before people knew it was going to close, a manager, a foreman, committed suicide in the plant in his uniform with his gloves in his back pocket, showing that he was inspecting. It was a real symbol because he had found out that they were going to close. I mean, so the city in the early 80s, after this great ride in the 50s, 60s, 70s, just it collapses overnight. And I think people, who are younger don't realize. And that happened in many places, Youngstown and Canton,
right.
and Akron and Cleveland.
Right.
And
now, how much of this do you trace back to Reagan, basically, in the policies they're putting in place?
Well, he put monetary places in place that helped bring that about.
Right.
He was incredibly anti-union, as we know. As one of his first acts was to fire the PATCO workers who were on strike, the air traffic controllers. It was very critical. But the irony, of course, is that a lot of working class people identified with Reagan. My family, on my dad's side, the Kovaliks, my grandfather's from Slovakia, but they were a very working class, blue collar family.
Right.
My uncle was a tool and die maker for General Motors for years. My other uncle was a postman. These are working class people. They were solid Democrats till 1980, and they all went over to Reagan.
Your classic Reagan Democrats,
right? They were Reagan Democrats, and a lot of Catholics went over because Catholics. There was more of a history in the past of American Catholics being interested in social issues.
Absolutely.
Being opposed to war, being supportive of unions, being supportive of welfare and social programs.
Absolutely.
And again, the Reagan Revolution, and it was a counter-revolution, it changed it, again, overnight. My whole family became Republicans for the most part.
Wow. And I'm just curious, is this a backlash to the 60s? Is it a backlash to abortion?
I remember it being that. Well, first of all, abortion, big. That was the gift that keeps giving, just an incredible bright line issue that continues to bring people to the Republican Party. But there was a reaction to the 60s. And again, I grew up in a home that vilified the hippies and the anti-war people. Okay. And I remember this, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but this is an important anecdote for how people were thinking. So in the early 80s, there was something called preppies. I don't know if that is a word people know about, but people went from wearing, their hippie clothes in the 60s, disco clothes or whatever in the 70s, to wearing very conservative outfits. These sweaters with the alligator on them and all that.
Would this be analogous to yuppies, basically? I mean, the same sort of thing, or would you draw a distinction sort of there?
Well, what's that?
Would you draw a distinction like preppies and yuppies? Would you say that kind of synonymous?
Synonymous? No, very similar. But here's the point. From my perspective at that young age, from my conservative household, was relieved by the preppies. I thought, our national nightmare of people walking around barefoot is over.
Right,
and it was this cultural shift. And as you say, it was a reaction, I think, to the 60s.
Yeah. You know what's fascinating? It just we got to get back on the schedule.
Got to get back on track.
My ADHD, man. But anyway, I got to say something. That Disco Demolition Night, I forget the podcast, but they
Chicago,
recently, in Comiskey Park, and I heard an usher. It was like a teenage black guy from the South Side talking about. I never really put this together, but he was talking about the level. It wasn't just like disco they were getting rid of. He said that the albums people were bringing in that night, it was like a sort of collective like rage against all things that were like not WASP, basically,
or maybe black, that were gay,
black, gay, anything.
Wonder records in it was racial. It was like a race riot. Part.
I guess WASP a little because like the whole. I mean, people go back to 1960, and the idea of a Catholic president. But now it's like you see, there's the Catholic Protestant divide. I mean, the right realized they had to consolidate that. That was part of the culture war sort of thing. Right. But a lot of people, I feel like young people today don't really understand how big of a deal that was. How all the rhetoric, I'm sure, and your family being Catholic, would hear about the president, will he be loyal to the Pope or to Vatican or to America and stuff, all that kind of Nixon, I think, even played on that stuff in 60 or somewhat and whatnot. But it's interesting. I mean, that was something that was that definitely played a big role in all that. So just generally speaking, we'll move on. But I mean, is there any one moment that sort of like high school football for you that stood out, like a lesson? I mean, you mentioned your coach, your teammates, because for me, like, I think it's instructive that, like, it can go one or two ways. And I'm just curious about what you think about this. Like, depending on how football is coached, that it can either be a terribly reactionary, damaging tool, and like can limit people's imaginations, especially in people in poor and oppressed communities where, they basically feel like they have no value aside from being able to play the game. And what's so tragic at having coached at predominantly black high schools for a few years and in Jacksonville, Florida, and also here in Jersey City for a year, you see that last game on their senior day. And, realizing the vast majority of these players aren't going to go off and play college ball. And the sense of just like confusion and the lack of identity is palpable. The tears, kids that like pride themselves on being hard, tough, kind of like having this external veneer of toughness. And but so that can be bad. But I also feel like that in a society where where neoliberalism has like just atomized this, it's put us where it's like made solidarity a bad word. It doesn't have to be football. It could be other sports too. And there's other ways, but I feel like there's also something that you learned that has also helped me in organizing stuff, quite frankly, as I got older, that a sense of shared sacrifice, commitment, a sense of like being in something together, the sense of camaraderie you get for all like kind of going through a hard time, like going through camp in August together and pushing through and finding a way to get through that. There is something that's not terrible. Like, I mean, there's so many things to critique about sports, and I'm just curious about what your experience was more specifically, because I think I kind of, jumped past that a little too quickly.
I don't think it was terrible. I value a lot of the things I learned. Mm-hmm. As you said, the camaraderie, especially at an all-guys Catholic school, is intense, Mm-hmm. And it wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad place. It wasn't like the place was divided up, between the jocks and the nerds. Everyone got along. Yeah. And there was this feeling of shared purpose, and there was a feeling of individual self-sacrifice for the good of the team. Now, again, some of that was carried too far. You saw guys who were basically crippled before they even made varsity high school. Their knees were blown out. Mm-hmm. You had, a guy I played with, I saw him years ago. He still has his arm still messed up because he played in the state championship with a broken arm and a cast. Mm-hmm. Yep. But he'll say to this day it was worth every second of it. He has no regrets. Again, maybe that's taking it to an extreme, but there is something to be learned from that, to play with pain, to play hurt, to play when you don't want to. I mean, that's the hardest part, when you have to get up at 5 a.m. During the summer to come to 2-a-day practices. And I value those lessons. Mm-hmm. I don't regret that, at least. And I miss the people, that I played with. I liked them. There wasn't one guy I didn't like.
Wow, yeah.
And again, I just felt like people were basically supportive of each other. Mm-hmm. It was a great experience. I mean, I know this is supposed to be a left-wing critique of sports, but I can't say that it was bad.
I feel like we don't want to be too formulaic either, though. There's so many left critiques of sports, and that I do that all the time. But it's also like, we don't want to be just contrived here, and I feel like we're fitting into a box. I think that if we're trying to reach other people, our goal, for me at least, like in doing this, is like, I think about the kind of kids who are now adults that I played ball with that, are not in good spots in their life right now, that grew up in oppressed, like, the Section 8 projects and really rough situations, who are been, locked up for various reasons. And also people that are working class and thinking of ways to organize people. And, people that are working class, proletarians, they love sports. I'm not a big pro wrestling guy or whatever, but a lot of people love that too. So I think that the way, instead of like, part of the reason the Democratic Party loses so much, and beyond just fundamentally not, being a center right or even right party, if you just looked at it objectively, now it only looks, I guess, somewhat decent in contrast to the absurdity, monstrosity that is the GOP, is that that's a true thing. They're looking down on the feeling of like that these elites, coastal elites, like, think we're dumb, talk down to us.
Of course, I think it's terrible.
Right.
It's terrible.
Right. The Rahm Emanuel view that your jobs aren't coming back. Thomas Frank talked about quoting that, I think, in his latest book.
Thomas Frank, I'm all into him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the one thing I want to say was it was probably the most integrated racially integrated experience I've ever had in my life was playing for Moeller, and that was very good in that way. I mean, and I worship some of those guys. I mean, really, to this day. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I don't feel bad about it. No,
I hear you, man. Tell me.
I mean, I don't view it as like my glory days or something because I was not the best player. Certainly, I mostly at Moeller played on specialty teams, and but the chance to be with people who were elite athletes, was an honor. It was an honor to play with a guy like Ken Griffey, right?
Yeah. So I was about to pivot there. So go ahead. Like tell me about the Griffeys and your relationship there.
Let me just say he was a nice guy, and I think we know he's
and Ken Griffey Jr., right, who was in Cincinnati, right, because his father was part of the Big Red Machine, right?
Played for the Big Red Machine, which I followed growing up, and his dad used to pick him up in his Rolls Royce, and but Ken Griffey Jr. was the nicest guy. He was a humble guy. And he was a great athlete. He was a receiver, and when he turned on the juice, he was an impressive guy. The funny thing is, I didn't follow baseball, high school baseball. I didn't even follow Moeller baseball. I didn't even know he played it. Honestly, I just knew he was on my football team. But of course, he must have because, he's a pretty good player.
Absolutely. But, I was just going to share real quick as we're talking. I don't know. Can you see the screen here? But just showing some pictures of Griffey here. That's him right there. Yeah. And, as a young man, you see Senior there who, was played along with Johnny Bench and so many other Pete Rose, of course, and
Tom Seaver. Everyone on that team was a Hall of Famer.
And you see there he is. That's Griffey's son now, who's a wide receiver. There's a lot of in fact.
Is he play for the Pittsburgh Panthers?
No,
like a Panthers.
No, that was not a Pitt Panther. That must have been his high school there.
Gotcha,
Trey Griffey did play at Arizona for the Wildcats there. But anyways, yeah. But anything else on Griffey you want to hit on before we move on to?
He was a nice, very soft-spoken guy, and I think he's famously a nice guy. He was the best player, as we know, in the steroid years, and he didn't choose like the other guys. I mean, it was an honor to be with people like that.
Yeah, sure. Well, how about this? Tell me about Percy Lee Snow, too, because you mentioned him, and I'd love to hear about him.
The funny thing is, so I'm wearing 33, but I also have a number 34 uniform. So we played the state championship against Canton McKinley. He was the running back.
It's funny. Even being from the South, I've known about Canton McKinley and Massillon. You always heard that that's like the Ohio version of Friday Night Lights.
And that's steel country, right? So these are the early days playing a team in steel country. And anyway, so he was the star running back for Canton McKinley. He would later go on to be a linebacker, I believe.
You see the screen there. You see, I think there he is right there. Michigan State,
And I think he was a great player. I think he was, and then he was drafted for the Kansas City
Chiefs
first round, and then I don't know what happened after that. But anyway, so talking about self-sacrifice and all, so for the week before we played the state championship, or 2 weeks, maybe we had a bye or something like that. I was Percy Snow. That's why I had number 34. He was number 34. And so my dude
on scout team, right? I guess you're saying here.
He had a certain stance he would make, which was a tell. And this is pretty impressive. I mean, this is high school, and they're watching films, and they saw that if his feet were close together, he was going to run on the inside. If they were farther apart, he was going to make an end around. So my job was to mimic his tell. in practice for the defense. And I did that. So I was Percy Snow.
Yeah.
And we held them to like -1 yards during the state championship, won the state championship.
You did a job well done.
Yeah. So anyway, that was pretty neat. And, and it was at OSU Stadium, the Ohio State.
Oh, at the Horseshoe there. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So great stuff. And it's like, I think it's important to kind of like have a chance to tell those stories. And also just because I don't know, especially in this time of COVID now where so many people feel isolated, I think the times like it's, I know I have students now. We're still on virtual instruction here in Jersey City, which is right across that, for those of you who don't know, from Lower Manhattan. And
I know that. I went to Colombia Law School. So
of course, yeah. You would know. I guess it's more kind of people that are watching the show. But anyways, it's the isolation, especially kids. I mean, I don't want to sound like some right winger, open it up, or using the talking point that how much kids are struggling. It's important that I think us as a teachers union, teachers stand in solidarity and increasing attacks now. We see now, but from right wingers and Don Trump Jr. I mean, I won't even say my personal feelings, but nonetheless, I think we can recognize and need to take serious the fact that it's the issues facing children who are already facing poverty, already in low income situations, not having much stimulation at home. It is just it's a height of just disgusting, treacherous, just bullshit to hear these people act, just concern trolling you hear from the GOP now about their well-being, which we all need to be concerned about. And it's a major thing, but you want to care about their well-being, you're going to pass COVID relief. You want to care about their well-being, You're going to stop spending money in these wars forever. You're going to stop Russiagating every 2 seconds to try to help the military-industrial complex eat up more money that could be going to help support their families, to help support, the communities that have been ravaged by mass incarceration and all these other ills of neoliberal capitalism. So I don't know. That's kind of my rant on that. But let's switch real quick. I don't know if you saw this. But Keith Olbermann he's been going down a bad road for a long time. I
saw something yesterday about him.
Wow. Yeah. Just wow. I mean, so the little background here. So there's a hockey player for the New York Rangers name. And I'll go back to, I can share my screen here so people can see this and you can too, because I think it's really ties in. You've written a lot and talked a lot about Russiagate and kind of what purposes that serves but anyways, this may have been a fabricated story. Evidently, he was showing some solidarity with Navalny. And look, I mean, I don't want to see a guy jail or whatever, but I think Yasha Levine did some really good work exposing did it on his podcast, Immigrants as a Weapon, and also his Substack about who Navalny is and the fact he's gone out and shot a guy in public with hard rubber bullets. He's a hard, fierce nationalist, who has very racist views, xenophobe towards people from the Caucasus, and all that's ignored, right? And also it's like, look, whatever you think about Putin, it's like I'll be willing. I don't know about you, but I mean, be critical of Putin, but only if you're willing to also look back and realize the U.S. created Putin and created the dynamics of empowering these oligarchs by letting Boris Yeltsin steal elections and literally blow up and attack his own democratically elected parliament, and then declare it somehow a victory for democracy. So just the irony of that, it just amazes me that Navalny talking about Putin's palace, all that's left out. All that's just somehow left out. That if we just get rid of this one bad guy, right, then everything somehow is going to be, go back to what? That you're going to nationalize these resources again. You're going to return apartments to people that lost everything. You're going to, help people. People's pensions are going to return. I mean, it's ridiculous. So you have this New York Rangers player who has to take the leave of absence. I mean, I don't know the specifics. I mean, he's being accused of, taking place, beating up an 18-year-old girl in 2011. This is Artemi Panarin from the Rangers. He's an outspoken supporter of Navalny. New York Post broke the story. And then the New York Rangers, all right, the most well-known NHL teams, and and one of the original six, said this. And I think that it's interesting to see, talk about the connections of politics and sports. I want to get your reaction from this and then Olbermann's tweet. But the New York Rangers put out a statement saying that Artemi vehemently and unequivocally denies any and all allegations in this fabricated story. This is clearly an intimidation tactic being used against them for being outspoken on recent political events. Artemi is obviously shaken and concerned and will take some time away from the team. The Rangers fully support Artemi and will work with him to identify the source of these unfounded allegations. Now, this has gone to the heart of what they're saying here, is that this is basically, again, they're Russiagating. It's a Russian government operation, essentially, to make him look bad and to make and to discipline someone for being critical of Putin. And I'm just wondering if there's any parallels to this. And this is something in the sports world we're seeing this pop up. And before I should just pull up the Olbermann tweet here real quick, just so you see that. Let's see, stop, share. Olbermann. Because Olbermann goes on here, and this is it really hits at, I think, the fact that, there's no other people you can talk about racially or ethnically like you can Russians. He says, gotta say, I've lived my entire life with the stain of Russian heritage in my family. Then came their conspiracy to alter the 2016 election. A year later, they hacked my computer. But now they've attacked my boy Panarin, so I'll make it official. Fuck you, Vladimir Putin. Hashtag NYR New York Rangers.
This is insanity. This Russiagate, and again, it reminds me growing up with the hatred of the Soviet Union that existed. I mean, this is nothing but the Cold War continuation. This is Cold War 2.0, basically.
Right.
Or 2.5, depends on how you're counting.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's insane. I mean, even smart people like Robert Reich, after the Capitol attack on January 6th, said Putin won. Putin has won. You had Hillary Clinton calling for an investigation as to whether Russia was behind the Capitol attack. This is nonsense. Of course, at one point, Colin Kaepernick was being accused of being a Russian stooge.
Oh, yeah. That's
gone away. But the whole thing, it just is bizarre. It is nothing but xenophobia, and it's to keep the population primed for war. That's what it is.
Right.
And it is interesting. Again, I mean, stop me if this is beyond the topic, but here's what's interesting, and here's how you're being propagandized. Well, first of all, for the U.S. to criticize Russia about mistreating protesters, come on. is that not the point? Calling the kettle black? I mean, I don't know what to say about it.
I don't have any words. I mean, it's
But then, meanwhile, okay, what's not reported? You are having daily mass protests in Haiti against the government right now. That is completely out of the news.
Absolutely.
In Colombia, South America, a country I've dealt with a lot in my life, you've had 77 human rights defenders killed last year. 360 some were killed worldwide. Over half of all human rights defenders killed were killed in Colombia, South America. Do you ever hear about that on the news? Never. It's the things you don't hear about, the things that are emphasized versus the things you don't hear about. Why do we care about Navalny that much? Okay, I'm not saying it's not worth some news ink. It is.
Right.
But why is it every day? And why do we listen about him to the exclusion of listening about the neo-Nazis that are in the government in Ukraine? Or again, the repression in Haiti or Colombia or Guatemala. All of this is to stoke, hatred for certain countries, right? And it's very opportunistic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I just got to respond here. I'm going to put something up here. Dan Cohen, who's a friend too, and has done some really good recent. Some really good recent reporting, and just wanted to see if you just look at this. Like every massacre is a message here. This is December 3rd. This is not by Dan actually, but he writes for Mint Press, and it's similar. But Dan's been down there doing a lot of reporting. But the point is just that the Trump administration waged a full-scale war to undermine Colombia's peace accords. But it's obviously bipartisan. I mean, you can talk about, Joe Biden and his role in Plan Colombia, right?
Plan Colombia was Plan Clinton. That was the Clintons.
Right, yeah.
And Hillary both, yeah.
Absolutely.
No, it's amazing to me. It's just amazing. the partisanship in this country is so bizarre where, if your president does something, it's fine. And then if the other party's president does it, it's bad. Again, the kids in cages. Now no one gives a damn about the kids in cages, right? They're not in cages.
Not only they don't give a damn, they got Democrat trolls on the internet going after people, pointing out the hypocrisy of the Biden administration. What do you expect them to do? They don't know where their parents are. What are we going to do? Sure, there are some issues. You can't just release a kid you don't know where their parents are. But why do they not know where their parents are? Well, they've been separated. Something that was going on before Trump even was in office. So it really unmasked, this idea of people. And it's why it's tough to ever build coalitions, because oppressed people, see that you're only caring about these things when elections come around. There's no principle. Yeah, the special election in Georgia, right? $2,000 checks are coming. Oh, well, we meant $1,400 and we can't even get that through necessarily. So, it's really something else. So we'll go ahead and transition, because there's a lot to get to, obviously. But, the Russia stuff can always go on. It's just, it's never ending. But anyways, I guess the next thing to get to is maybe just apologize here. I don't want to give you a chance to actually just talk about your latest book here. First of all, I was going through the plot that can overthrow Venezuela and the plot that control the world, how the U.S. has spent billions to change the outcome of elections around the world, and then obviously with Iran too. And I just think, and obviously you have the No More War coming out now. And I think it's just what we've been talking about. Someone like Keith Olbermann, who used to famously talk about how many days it had been since Bush declared mission accomplished, just shows you how just complete and utter bullshit that was, right? Because in your scholarship here, you're pointing out just how bipartisan this is. And how much this is not an issue of just a Republican or a Democrat. It's an enduring kind of characteristic of U.S. empire. And the idea of election interference, of all things, is just amazing. So I was just wondering, maybe out of all your works, and then also what you would maybe want to say about No More War and how it's kind of different and builds on what you've already published in the past. Yeah,
what I basically try to argue in the book is that if you care about human rights and international law, the biggest focus you should have, especially as an American, is to stop war. Yeah. War under international law, as I discuss in the book, under the UN Charter, which is really the constitution of the world, which the U.S. helped draft at the time, the main scourge it intends to prevent is war. Because the idea is that once you start a war, all the other evils that we're concerned about flow from it: torture, rape, war crimes. So the goal was to try to stop war in the first place. But as I talk about in the book, and as most people understand, even viscerally, if they don't, kind of intellectually or consciously, is that what has happened is an inversion of that idea. Now, particularly liberals think that the way to defend human rights is to start a war. And so we see, particularly when we look at the Obama administration, right? Liberals and even many leftists supported the invasion of Libya. Even Democracy Now! Cheer-led that. Yeah. Right?
Absolutely.
And believing that it was to defend human rights. In fact, it was the opposite. Human rights have been eroded in that country and in neighboring countries as a result of the war. There are now slaves being sold in open markets in Libya. You have a country that's ungovernable, that's being run by a few different, armed militias. Black people are being persecuted there. And so, and we know this, no one disputes it. Again, Libya is largely ignored now because it's an inconvenient fact of what happened there. But you had a war like no other that was sold by these humanitarians, in quotes, like Hillary Clinton, like Samantha Power, who's back in the Biden administration, like Susan Rice, who's back in the Biden administration, who openly sold this war as a war for human rights, when in fact it was a war against human rights, which I detail in the book. Mm-hmm. And it was a war based on lies. And yet most liberals supported it, and they support it still. They think it was a good idea, even though they know, that the country was decimated. And you have people like Obama who were just utterly given a free pass.
Yeah.
For that. And for Yemen. He started the war in Yemen.
Yeah.
Now the worst humanitarian crisis on earth. He is a war criminal.
Absolutely.
He is responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of people, easily, if not millions.
Right.
And yet he's virtually uncriticizable. Is that a word? He's a saint.
Let's make it one. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a saint now. I just saw he's got a podcast with Bruce Springsteen.
Oh, I mean, it's just disgusting. I mean, the Ringer Bill Simmons is bringing him on, talking sports, doing everything to kind of humanize himself. Just good old Barry Barack. He's just he's just your guy. Just everyone in Barack Obama's school. It's nauseating. I mean, there's so many schools. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you're going to see more of this. So, the irony is this, the one thing, and we don't know how sincere he was about it, because we don't know how sincere he is about anything. But the one thing that Donald Trump said that made a lot of sense is that we have to stop these endless wars,
Right.
And one of the big reasons that this Russiagate nonsense was promulgated,
right,
was to undermine any intention he had of doing just that.
Sure.
It was to mau him into staying the course to continue U.S. warfare in countries like Afghanistan,
right?
Where he was starting to withdraw. Biden's made it clear he's not going to withdraw,
right?
And there you're told we have to be there to protect women's rights when we're not protecting them now. In fact, they point out in the book. And this is in a Time magazine article, Afghanistan is ranked at the very bottom, last in the world for women's rights. So, could it get worse?
Yeah.
I mean,
You have to bring some U.S. troops in there really to help empower women, right? Just Well,
and I have a whole chapter, the U.S. military is not a feminist organization. And yet we are basically led to believe that. If you listen to NPR, they had like a whole week where they talked about this girls' soccer team in Afghanistan. And the whole point of it was, isn't this great? There's a girls' soccer team, and if we leave, there won't be a girls' soccer team.
There won't be. Right.
What are you talking about? This is insane. And yet people, they buy this stuff. And so I think you're going to see more war under Biden. Yep. I think that he was picked because he's happy to do that. Mm-hmm. Picked by the ruling class. That is, that's the people who vet,
Sure.
Bernie Sanders was never going to be the nominee, and they kneecapped him.
Well, but real quick, I got to interject. I mean, does Sanders, is he delusional, or was he like playing a role as controlled opposition? I'm still struggling. As part of me, I think he's a good, decent person, but at the same time, knowing what happened in 2016, was he gaslighting all his supporters to make them think
I
this
don't
really
think
happened?
so.
Or is he really that naive? I mean, I'm wondering what your take is on that.
Look, he came pretty close. I mean, at one point it looked like he could have done it, I think he was hoping for a miracle, and I think it's okay to hope for miracles. I think he's a sincere guy. And I think he was the one person in America who could have, brought socialist values to the White House. Right. I think now maybe AOC is that person. I'd like to think, obviously there's things to criticize about her, but I think she's that person. But for a long time, Sanders was the only person, and I think,
But what does it concern you too with me? Because I mentioned Max Blumenthal, and we talked a lot. And one thing that he and I were kind of hitting on recently is just how AOC has such a following. What she could do. I think that in the sports world, LeBron James, what he could do with just a single tweet. Look at what he did with the China stuff. And regardless of what people think of China, it's clear that the elites in the U.S. are completely pushing these stories, as if suddenly the U.S. cares so much about the rights of Muslims, right, in Western China. I mean, as if, or anywhere in the world, right?
The U.S. has killed 4 million Muslims since 9/11. I mean,
right. And you have Mike Pompeo going around, like before he left office, talking about this stuff. So it's just the thing that concerns me as AOC's, I guess, is it just she's playing the game? But when she ran, she said, like, we have to, part of the appeal was not to be the same. Even if you're a one-termer, you're going to stand on principle. You're going to force votes and whatever people think force the vote. I'm not trying to get into that. But the lack of international solidarity. I mean, Max asked her a question before the pandemic was outside, and he was outside the office about Venezuela. She just will not touch it. Yeah. And it's like, is it just playing the game? Is it committee chairs?
I think it's playing the game. Yeah, look, I think she wants to run for senator. She probably wants to run for president. Mm-hmm. And again, how it works is the only way that's going to happen, realistically, is for her to accept certain basic premises of the empire. Mm-hmm. And if she doesn't, she's done. There's no way she'll move past the House of Representatives. She'll end up being like a Ron Dellums or something, which had a very proud history. But I mean, she knows she'll be relegated to the House,
right?
And is to quote Lyndon Johnson, the difference between the House of Representatives and the Senate is the difference between chicken shit and chicken salad.
Oh yeah,
she wants chicken salad, and so I think you'll probably see more compromises there.
So I guess it brings to the question then, how much can be achieved through electoral politics versus does the essential task of the left need to be rebuilding a militant labor struggle, around unionizing Amazon workers, around unionizing, all sorts of gig workers and whatnot. I think you see there's some insurgent Teamster, organizing going on with Teamsters United around the country and different locals that are trying to take on Jimmy Hoffa Jr. But none of this is reported in media. That's what's wild to me, right?
Labor struggles, by and large. In fact, last year we had more strikes in America, I think, than any other time since World War II. There were 1,200 strikes just last year. But you wouldn't know it, by paper or listening to.
No, which brings me to a sports connection, which is one of the only spheres, one of the only places in U.S. society where they will cover collective bargaining contracts is in stuff like sports, and so that's why I see there being not just my own personal interest, but a strategic window that you see people like Justin Jackson, who went to Northwestern University, who's become very outspoken as a running back with the Los Angeles Chargers. I think he might have a little more resistance if he was a quarterback, the face of a franchise, Colin Kaepernick was. But you look back behind me, there's Craig Hodges, who he didn't really have the movement backing when he was doing what he was trying to do in the early 90s. And it's really a shame, because, when you don't. But I think now one thing, social media with all the ills of it and the way that big tech and I want to get to that in a second, but the big tech stuff, but it does allow a sort of ability for people to connect in places and collapse geographical hurdles for people kind of building connections. But at the same time, how do you make things concrete and tangible? But I think that sports can be instructive. We saw,
of course,
with the NBA strike, for a day, people were so, a lot of people on the left were so critical. And I get it. Obama came in there, used his influence, talked to LeBron. Let's turn it all into a campaign about voting. Just vote, right? Just sort of without any real concrete demands, just elect Joe Biden and get back to normalcy. So it's sad, but I see it as more of a protracted thing that where athletes, especially this time of COVID, this is a good time. You mentioned college sports, which is a huge focus of what we talk about. And that you talk about stripping bare the realities of the farce of amateurism. It's nothing like what this last year, nothing could have done it like this last year, because you had all the glamour and glitz, the whole big man on campus type, sense you get of, playing at, the packed horseshoe in Columbus or in Tuscaloosa at Bryant-Denny Stadium, and having that feeling that kind of, it's what made me want to keep coming back and pushing through injuries to play college football, to get that kind of chase that kind of drug almost. Something that I grew up watching big games and I pay the price for it now with a degenerative back and issues like that. But nonetheless, this last year, all that was gone. And yet you had D2 canceled. You had Division III canceled. You had all these the leagues and non-revenue sports canceled. But we're playing football. in front of empty or filled stadiums. Now in the Southeastern Conference, they were maybe a little more than semi-filled in some places, but nonetheless, like, you are doing this for what at this point, right? You're all the resources being just taken away from other populations that need to be served, to have all the testing that's required to be done, to keep an idea of normality going for the public, the idea that things are getting better, whether they are or they aren't. But also, I think a lot of these players, you will not be able to undo that experience of like seeing kind of the callous disregard there is for, their long-term health, and by people that ostensibly you're led to believe have your best intentions in mind. So maybe I didn't give you a chance to kind of talk on what your biggest takes are with like college sports, and maybe strategies or suggestions you would have for people that are been former college athletes and are trying to make or people that are just in general concerned and want to try to build connections between working class struggles and labor movements, and seeing these college athletes as unpaid athletic laborers, as Nathan Coleman Lamb talks about a lot in the sport podcast.
And they are, again, they're maybe the most super exploited people in America, because you have players who are paid nothing, who are making billions of dollars of revenue for these universities. They really keep these universities running. I mean, basically universities now are football teams posing as a university. And then their coach will make $1 million or whatever. The president of the university will make $1 million, and they're getting nothing. And then, of course, if they get hurt, and that, especially in football, is a real possibility. Every time you go onto the field, that's a possibility that you're going to have a career-ending.
I mean, Dan, just think about it. This book here, it's just nothing but good, clean violence there,
to not have a compensation system for these people,
right?
If they're hurt, to not, again, pay them a fair share for what they're doing and all the money they're raising, is just wrong. And I do think. And I do think there's a growing consciousness about that. I think there's a lot of support. Again, even, my dad, who's pretty right-wing, even he's like, it's ridiculous. I mean, because
it even offends the libertarian type sensibility, like the free marketers, the idea of like, that, they'll be terrible on like social stuff to help poor people and whatnot. But, the idea of not getting paid for an honest day for your work, your labor, it's wild.
Well, it's all part, again, first of all, the universities are a microcosm of the greater economy. We're becoming a gig economy, right?
Yeah.
Meaning people who have no job security, no benefits, they're contingent laborers. And the universities now reflect that, not only with the sports players, but even with the professors now, with the adjuncts, right?
Right.
Who are getting, I teach a law school class, and I get $3,000 to teach a law school class where students are paying $48,000 a year.
Right. You and my dad should talk. He's a judge in Florida, but he teaches Florida constitutional law to third year law students, and it's some money, but it's obviously he wouldn't do that if that was something he actually had to rely upon for his sole.
And a lot of people
living. You can't really, and a lot of people do.
Universities are becoming more and more adjunctified, if I can. Adjuncts are now carrying the greatest burden of the teaching, and they're getting paid poverty wages. I mean, this is insane. It's absolutely insane. And again, there's many lessons to be learned here. That the professors are now in the same boat as the athletes.
It's amazing. Yeah, I mean, tenure track has essentially become very, very difficult. I mean, it's
a thing of the past. It's just not.
Unless you're some sycophantic bootlicker, I guess somehow it's willing to play the game and whatever. But I don't. It's just wild. I mean, I know at Pitt you have Pat Narduzzi as the head coach. I'm wondering he's probably the highest paid employee there. And then you also look at it, what you said too. It's worth noting that they've pitted college football and then college basketball at the schools, so that makes a lot too. there are a few schools like UConn and a few others where women's college basketball makes money, but it is mainly football and then men's basketball. But they're pitting them against as if okay, players, if you don't play college football, D1 guys, you are going to cause all these non-revenue sports to be cut. Whoa, time out. It's since when did it become the job of unpaid athletic labor for them to finance?
Going.
It's
ridiculous. This is absurd.
So they're technically correct because the way the system's set up, but it's
a bad system. It's a evil system. No,
absolutely.
Yeah, man. These are the things they just need to be reminded about, because people know this on a gut level, that this is wrong, that this is unsustainable. I mean, we live, again, generally speaking, in an economy that's unsustainable. Yeah. And you're seeing the results of it. You're seeing mass homelessness. You're seeing, again, record levels of deaths from a disease that many other countries dealt with a long time ago successfully.
Absolutely.
The American dream is dead. And it only existed anyway for a very short period of time, maybe in the 50s and 60s.
And the Graduate there with the plastics.
In the plastic, right. In the Graduate, exactly. Yeah. And it's gone. It's gone. You cannot raise a family on one income, much, or even two. And I think people realize that they just don't know how, what the solution is, but.
Yeah, and they just can't face it. Maybe they even might know it, but the idea of just it's that socialism word. You look back and just studying the connections between sport and politics really brought me to understanding the 1950s and the whole Red Scare stuff, the muscle gap discourse, and the way that we're falling behind the Soviets. We're falling behind. We got to get more, robust, young men that can keep up to fight the communists and whatnot. The way even throughout doctors' offices, all throughout starting with the early 50s, you had the American Health Associations, American Medical Associations campaigns to just demonize socialized medicine. You see that. I see that with grandparents. Every people that are people that were pre-baby boomers even, and kids that were baby boomers were just inundated with that. It's just the idea that you are, man. It's just it's like breaking through that people need to recognize how monumental that is, and the fact that we can't just act as if that propaganda is just not out there. I think sometimes young people forget that this generational divide, you can't just forsake and act like we're going to wait another 20, 30 years for these kind of things. These are climate change, and the problems facing people workers that don't have any stability, social, literal social security, not the actual program. It's if you don't actually reach out, and that just troubles me. I hope the best for AOC, and I want to see that, but it's if they're not willing, I get it. You got to play the game to some extent, but what are you actually doing if it's just playing the game? And how is it different if you're not going to point out the absurd contradictions in the U.S. is demonizing of Venezuela while just being totally silent on Colombia, or saying nothing, demonizing Cuba and saying nothing about Haiti, who this guy who's in charge now, it's just the neoliberal austerity on steroids down there. And so anyways, it's just, I don't know. It's frustrating, obviously.
No, it is. Although, the truth is that, you mentioned there is Medicare for all propaganda, but still 67% of America wants it. The thing is, these are, if we can reunite on these issues, I think they are winnable, Yeah. And again, I think we have to find those issues that we can, that people want. Chomsky said that for years. The polls show Americans, by and large, are pretty progressive on all the issues. They can be manipulated based on a lot of things: racism, xenophobia, religious issues, abortion.
Fear of communism, right? Yeah. Fear of.
But when asked issue by issue, they're pretty good for the most.
Yeah. It just shows you the power of media, right? And it's why we see the gatekeepers trying harder than ever. I know I've kept you already going over an hour, so I want to maybe in the next 10 minutes wrap it up. But a couple of things we mentioned, and I barely kind of went by with Tommy Waddle.
I want to talk about Tommy Waddle.
because like it ties into the larger concussion problem. We had Vincent Jackson, who was a 3-time Pro Bowl receiver for the Chargers and Buccaneers, die a week ago after police said he was fine in Tampa. Clearly was not fine. And at 38 years old, and you have guys like Dave Duerson, who committed suicide from the 85 Bears, and Junior Seau, who's just was a legend I was born in 86. So growing up like in that era, it was like, Junior Seau was just like a god type guy if you followed football. And how does Waddle tie into that and the whole idea of like kind of that maybe machismo culture in football and kind of the harm that can do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to give you an anecdote before I get to Tommy Waddle about O.J. Simpson that I just learned about.
Go for it. I always love an O.J. anecdote.
So I had as a lawyer, you have to do these continuing legal education classes. And my secretary, who was awesome, always signed me up for the fun one. So I had one at the baseball stadium, and the issue was concussion law, like workers' compensation law related to concussions. And one of the guys on the panel speaking about it had been an offensive lineman for the Buffalo Bills. He was part of what was called the Electric Company, and he blocked for O.J. Simpson. He knew O.J. very well. And he said the most interesting thing. He said O.J. was the nicest guy. He was nice to the players. He was nice to the fans. He said, but O.J. had a big head. And he says, when I say big head, I don't mean he's conceited. He was conceited. He has a physically big head. He couldn't fit into his helmet. And so what he did was take out all the pads out of his helmet so he could fit into it.
Wow.
So O.J. was playing with a helmet with no pads. So, this guy's convinced that, O.J. went crazy because of concussions and whatnot. And I'm sure it's true. And, it's a tragedy. I mean, lives were lost because of that.
My dad still says that he doesn't think that anyone's is just at the top of their game been a better running back than Simpson. Even Jim Brown had a sort of career. The combination of speed, the way he could break away, hit the hole. I don't mean to humanize him too much, so people get mad with that. But we have a similar issue now. I mean, I don't know if you've heard in the news, Dan, but the issue with the Seattle Seahawks here. Chad Wheeler, who'd recently been released, and then you had the Aaron Hernandez documentary come out, and the combination of like the homophobic, being raised, the repressed, the homosexuality, and feeling the very real need to repress that, or maybe he was bisexual. I think it was more accurate. But having a mother that was, a mother and a father that were it was a guaranteed fact that something bad was going to happen, with that. And you tie that together, a guy like Greg Hardy, who almost had his girlfriend or spouse, mother of his child, his girlfriend and mother of his child, almost electrocuted in a bathtub. Chad Wheeler, who suffers from bipolar, had been with the Seahawks just a month ago, really. Went from being this sweet, nice boyfriend they've been dating for 6 months, and then the girl said that just one night his switch flipped and went batshit, man. And
Tony Brown too. Some of the weirdness he's shown is probably concussion related. Which brings me to Tommy Waddle, who he was a senior when I was a junior, so he and I overlapped for a bit, and I knew him. He was a nice guy. He still is, I'm sure.
And so you're talking about in high school now. So he would have been from Cincinnati, Ohio?
Yeah, he went to Moeller. Yeah. He went
to Moeller.
And look, his story is an amazing story. He walked on to the Bears. Mm-hmm. He's a little guy, very fast, I think. I think he runs a 4.3, 4.40. So he was fast, but he's a very small guy for NFL football. But he walked onto the team. Became a receiver for them. And I saw that Madden, I believe. John Madden ranked him as one of the top 10 Chicago Bear receivers ever, which is huge. And Absolutely. He would get clobbered. He would be freaking unconscious, and he'd come back and he'd score a touchdown. As a lot of guys talk about, right? Roger Staubach talked about that, how he had games he can't remember because he blacked out. And Waddle would have like 3 concussions a game. I'm not even kidding. Like, this guy had to have been concussed multiple times. But he kept going. I don't think he played for the Bears real long because, again, I mean, it was just the punishment that his body took was incredible. So what do we make of this? I mean, obviously, it's concerning. I mean, you have to worry about his welfare going forward. What this may catch up to him. Obviously, I hope it doesn't. But there, I'd be lying if I didn't say I admired him to some extent. I mean, to endure that type of punishment, and to keep going for something he loved, and he loved it. He loved football.
Yeah,
there's something to be said about it.
There is.
And he was loved for that reason. They loved Tommy Waddle in Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. You think about it. I mean, think about what that says, though. It's because there's some people that say their conclusion is like football abolition, but then you look at for me, it's just this is ingrained in our culture. All right, there's violence is American as apple pie, and it's like for me, I think it's something that sure in a society maybe where neoliberal capitalism wasn't the dominant ideology, and we had many other outlets for creativity and whatnot. But if you're talking about, there's whole, communities in the South, and especially in Black communities where the police maybe where they're constantly harassing people at that. But when it comes to the Saturday at the Pop Warner Park, they kind of it's a safe, it's ironic to say a safe space in football, but, a place of community, a place where there's, the cheerleading teams and the football teams and people, coming together, and you have to kind of,
by the way, we have to shout out to the cheerleaders, many of whom don't even get paid in the NFL.
No. You're right. They're not at all. They do not get paid, actually. Right. And so it's neat. Thank you. It's an important point to make because they do not get paid. And it's obviously the idea, the rationale for that is tied into kind of just an idea of what work has value and what work doesn't. Right. And I pulled this up, of sharing my screen just to let you know, I thought this was interesting and wanted to see kind of your reaction. This was from 10 years ago, but it said former Bears wide receivers lashing out at Brandon Merriweather, who was played at the University of Miami, great safety, but for his big hits, and used to be like on ESPN with Chris Berman and Tom Jackson, these segment called "He Got Jacked Up," and the way you romanticize the big hits. And I'll be honest, it's like the big hit is something that's jarring, it's exciting, and whether football can ever be safe or not, I don't think it can fully be safe, but I think that we need to fight and demand that players are treated given the absolute best equipment, that we're constantly researching things, that we stand in solidarity with them every step of the way, I feel like. And if the left actually did that, people that, had socialist politics, that were able to draw the connections, back to how the ills and the pathologies that go on in the neighborhoods they grew up in, were, if we had a socialist program and instead of having all these grifters in the ears of pro athletes and people talking about building your brand and this and that constantly, I think these guys would be I know a lot of guys that would be far more receptive to that. But we have a severe lack of political education in this country by design in K through 12 education. It's all designed about how to just get you to learn how to, kind of fit into what, the big industries of the day want. Anyways, it's just I think it's a challenge that that I get why some people on the left feel the way they do about football. You see it, you see the flyovers, you see it, but realize that just like in society, there is class struggle going on. Those players are not down there on the field. The vast majority of them caring about some stealth fighter fly over and feeling like they want to go hop on a uniform and go fight in Afghanistan or Iraq. I can promise you that. So there's a
one guy who did. Tillman got killed apparently by friendly fire.
Yeah, and he was actually
cover it up. Yeah,
and they tried to cover up who he really was too, which is someone that was much more complex than just the jingoistic guy they portrayed.
Yeah,
he just thought that it was well, I'm going to be getting paid a bunch of money if someone else has to go fight this. He was misguided, and then not only did they lead him into war on totally false grounds, as if he was, keeping people safe from another 9/11, sort of the way it was framed. Then when he died, without even the decency to know that they had to use him as a tool to help recruit further, right? And so anyways, it's like Tom Waddle, this is from 2011, lashed out. I thought you'd find this ironic against Brandon Merriweather, who makes a lot of big hits. And Waddle said on ESPN 1000 in Chicago, he then doesn't approve of the way Merriweather plays the game, because you can call me a sissy all you want. Okay, I was on the receiving end of a lot of head-to-head hits. Right. And maybe it's the reason I act the way I do. But in football, there are going to be moments when a guy is trying to make a tackle and his helmet hits yours. It's going to happen. In today's game, you're going to get flagged for it. That's the way it is.
Yeah, and it is. That is an advance, and I think the quarterback rules are better now, protecting the quarterback. And but yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's going to be, the violence is going to be part of it, but it's like, I think the reality, though, is that, it's unfair to defenders sometimes. It's like, the receiver can, move his body, whatever. You're trying to hit a moving target and sometimes, but you do have to, I think, throw the flag on that kind of stuff, because at a younger age, teaching tackling and the way you teach tackling and emphasizing it at a very young age, that your head's up at all times, see what you hit, are critical things for people that still do feel comfortable letting their kids play ball.
Yeah, and if I can say something again, that strikes me a lot, and I know we're nearing the end here, but the thing that strikes me a lot when I watch football, and I do watch football, I enjoy football, and I have found it to be a panacea during the pandemic. Again, I'm totally honest about that.
I second. Same here.
But the thing I notice all the time is opponents don't pick up their opponents from the field anymore. When I was at Moeller, one of the things that was very, very important, and again, this is why I feel I learned great lessons, was you knock a guy down, you pick him up, and you pat him on the butt. Good sportsmanship was part of what we learned, And when I watch games and I see someone knock someone down and not only not lift them up off the ground, but taunt them, that's just very disappointing to me. I think that's part of the game, is that good sportsmanship. And I feel like that's been lost, certainly in NFL football. I think the NBA is a little different. Every sport's different in that way. But in the NFL, I don't see that hardly ever. And that's disappointing,
You see it with teammates helping other teammates out, but right. But if it's the idea is that sort of like, if it's your opponent, then because it's sort of like you have to put your mind, I hate that when I think about this, it does sort of freak you out, but you have to put your mind in a headspace when you're playing, even at the big level Division I college football. I was at I'm just under 6'7", and my height I got up to just under 300 pounds. So I was playing offensive tackle. My back could have stayed healthy. That's what kept me going. The idea that I had the perfect frame to play professionally. It's like things worked out. But and my basketball background helped with footwork and stuff too. But you get out there and you have to put yourself in a place to where you are ready to inflict pain. You're ready to go out and and be in a mentality where you can't think about all these large macro level things. You have to, as Jimbo Fisher at Florida State, who was the coach there when I was there, and would say, who was a Nick Saban disciple, eliminate the clutter. You are focused it's an intense focus on the now, the immediate, this rep, this drill, getting better, not worrying about these long-term goals, because then you bog yourself down with, if we lose this game and this happens, and paralysis by analysis. So with that, sometimes it's the downside is that it does kind of create a sense of callousness, where you're in that moment, you're not thinking about helping that guy up or whatever. You're thinking
about trying to strike him out or whatever. Yeah, but then you do see these good stories, like the long distance run where the guy helped the other guy across the finish line. And I think he ended up winning with that.
That
I think the one thing when you have the philosophy that Lombardi had, that winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. I think that's when you get into that, and that is a lesson that should not be taught. That is not. It's not about that. And again, I felt growing up that it was never about that for us either, and that's good. I was lucky, I guess.
Yeah, you were. I know where I was. It definitely was all about winning and won a lot, but it's there's other costs that come with that, and but nonetheless, it's been great, just having this discussion. As you can see, the the sun setting on the horizons, messing my lighting up here a little bit. But I've really thoroughly enjoyed it. And as always with these, we can there's a million things that word could get to. But anything else you'd like to close with? I mean, anything I'd like just briefly, I guess we didn't touch on it, mention Oliver Stone. He's been, you've championed his work and vice versa. And I was just thinking maybe what's your favorite Stone film and why? Would you say Salvador or Platoon?
I would say it's either Salvador or Platoon. And the reason is they were very life-changing films for me. I mean, I remember being in high school and I was with my dad. He and I went to go see Platoon. And I remember the scene, which really happened, okay, because Charlie Sheen in it is loosely playing Oliver Stone, right?
Right.
In his experience there. In the movie, he breaks up. He stops his colleagues, his comrades, from raping a girl, which, as we know, happened a lot in Vietnam.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. I couldn't even believe my eyes that this was happening. This is not what I learned about war, right?
Right.
Even though we know it's a very integral part of war. That blew my mind. I mean, that movie blew my mind in Salvador. I mean, I give him credit a lot for my political education. So, absolutely.
And the Salvador thing with the Romero, with his passing, I'm sure that, I can't even imagine how big of an impact that would have had on you as a 12-year-old boy. So anyways, we'll go ahead and wrap there as the sun is telling me it's time anyways. Great. So thanks so much, Dan. I really appreciate it. And I hope we can catch up here soon. All right. So take care. Be well.
All right. Thanks, Nate.
Take care. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.